Have you ever gone to bed, but your mind stayed awake?
Your body is tired, but your brain starts building 1,000 different stories. What if this happens? What if they meant something else? What if tomorrow goes wrong?
We live in a world that never slows down. News, messages, pressure, comparison, everything is constantly asking for your attention.
But maybe the human mind was never built to carry this much noise.
And maybe overthinking isn't just thinking too much.
Maybe it's your brain trying to protect you from things that haven't even happened yet.
Sometimes your brain isn't thinking to help you.
It's thinking because it's scared.
Today on HumanCode, we're going inside the mind that never really turns off.
To understand why your thoughts keep running.
Why silence can feel so uncomfortable.
And why what you called overthinking might actually be your brain's silent cry for safety.
Imagine it is like 3 a.m, the lights are off, the room is completely quiet, you're absolutely exhausted, but your brain has suddenly decided that an awkward, maybe slightly poorly worded email you sent 3 days ago is an immediate life or death crisis.
Oh yeah, we have all been there.
Right. You are just staring at the ceiling, playing out every single possible disaster scenario from that one email. And I mean, if you're the kind of person who loves to learn, who analyzes the world to make sense of it, your ability to think deeply usually feels like a superpower.
It really does, until it doesn't.
Exactly. Because in that moment at 3 a.m, that superpower totally turns into a trap.
We've got a really incredible stack of sources today.
We do. We are looking at this fascinating collection of clinical excerpts and a deep scientific research brief on a phenomenon known as repetitive negative thinking.
Which is such a great term for it.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to look under the hood of what we, casually just call overthinking.
Yeah.
We want to explore the neurological and psychological mechanisms driving it, and most importantly, extract the most evidence-based strategies to actually stop the loop.
And it is a super vital topic to unpack because the way we culturally talk about overthinking is, well, it's fundamentally flawed.
How so?
We treat it like a personality quirk, right?
Yeah.
Or even a sign of high intelligence. We assume that, hey, if we are thinking really hard about a problem, we must be working toward a solution.
Yeah, that's the illusion, I guess.
Exactly. But clinical science doesn't view it that way at all.
Right.
I mean, you won't even find the word overthinking as a formal diagnosis in any of the research.
Right. They use the term repetitive negative thinking, or RNT.
Right.
And one of the most striking details from the sources is that RNT is described as transdiagnostic.
Yes, that's a crucial point.
It isn't just confined to a single condition. It's the underlying engine driving so many different struggles. Anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, insomnia, post-traumatic stress. It really functions as this universal glitch in the human operating system.
A glitch that researchers actually divide into 2 primary branches based on their temporal focus. The first branch is worry.
And worry is inherently future-focused, right?
Right. Its structural foundation is always built on the question, what if? What if the market crashes? What if they realize I'm totally unqualified for this job? What if this plane has a mechanical failure?
So it's just the brain anticipating a threat that hasn't even arrived yet.
Precisely. It's attempting to mentally rehearse a survival strategy for a hypothetical future.
Okay, let's unpack this, because then you have the second branch, which is rumination. And if worry is looking forward, rumination is looking backward, and it's heavily self-focused.
Yeah, it shifts from what if to why.
Right. Like, why did I say that? Why does this always happen to me? What is fundamentally wrong with the way I interact with people?
And the defining characteristic of both worry and rumination, the thing they share, is the complete absence of a resolution.
They never actually end.
Exactly. Healthy, adaptive thinking is flexible. It's reality-based. You gather information, weigh your options, and you arrive at an endpoint, like a decision or a concrete action. Repetitive negative thinking never arrives anywhere. It simply generates more questions.
I mean, think of it this way. Healthy thinking is like driving your car to a specific destination. You map out a route, navigate the turns, arrive at the address, and you turn the engine off.
A very clean, functional process.
But overthinking is like being stuck in a massive, multi-lane roundabout. You can feel the engine working incredibly hard, you're gripping the steering wheel, checking your mirrors, and burning an immense amount of fuel.
And because you're putting in so much effort, you are entirely convinced you're making progress.
Yes, but you are actually just going in circles, exhausting your resources without ever leaving the intersection.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the psychology behind why we voluntarily stay in that roundabout is fascinating. It comes down to a well-documented concept called the intolerance of uncertainty.
Intolerance of uncertainty. That makes so much sense.
Right. An anxious brain doesn't just fear physical danger or bad news. It is deeply, deeply threatened by not knowing. A lack of certainty registers in the nervous system as a profound vulnerability.
So we stay in the roundabout because worrying feels like doing something.
Exactly. We are confusing mental friction with forward momentum. There is a specific line from the research brief that captures this dynamic perfectly. It says, "Overthinking is not intelligence. It is a threat loop wearing the costume of analysis."
Wow, a threat loop wearing the costume of analysis. That completely reframes the whole behavior.
It strips away the illusion that we're being responsible or diligent.
So if we know that overthinking is just a useless roundabout that drains our energy, why does the human brain so easily trap us there? Like, what is actually happening biologically when we slip into that state?
To understand the biology of the trap, we really have to look at the brain's default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN.
Yeah, the DMN is a large-scale brain network that naturally activates when our attention is not directed toward a specific external task. It's the system responsible for self-reflection, autobiographical memory, mental time travel, and just general mind-wandering.
It's basically the background hum of the brain. Like when you aren't solving a math problem or navigating traffic or talking to someone, the DMN boots up and the mind turns inward.
And that inward turn is a completely healthy evolutionary function. I mean, it allows us to integrate our experiences and form a sense of identity. However, and this is the kicker, the research shows that in states of high stress, anxiety, or depression, the default mode network becomes hijacked by threat focus.
It goes rogue.
Totally rogue. The brain starts taking abstract concepts like your long-term career trajectory or your social standing and treats them as immediate physical predators that must be defeated right this second.
Which is wild because it forces you to try and solve an abstract concept using the biological machinery designed for, like, immediate physical survival.
Exactly.
Which creates what the clinical sources call analytical avoidance. Because we are so busy wrestling with these abstract threats in our head, we use the act of thinking to avoid dealing with our actual reality.
Yes. We think we're doing the hard work of solving our life, but the thinking is actually a shield.
Right. We're using it to avoid feeling grief or to avoid initiating unnecessary confrontation, or maybe just to avoid the raw discomfort of accepting that the future is uncertain. We basically replace the terrifying requirement of taking real action with the safe, sterile environment of endless analysis.
Spot on. And the mechanism of how this avoidance cycle actually initiates is perhaps the most surprising finding in the literature.
Oh, here's where it gets really interesting.
It does, because we generally operate under the assumption that our thoughts dictate our physical feelings.
Right. Yeah, we assume we have a stressful thought about money, and consequently, our stomach tightens up.
Right. But the evidence suggests that the causality frequently runs in the opposite direction. Overthinking often begins in the body, long before the conscious narrative even forms.
Wait, so is it possible that my massive existential crisis about my career choices in the middle of the afternoon is actually just my brain trying to write a story to explain why my jaw is tense or my stomach hurts?
Yes, that is a very real possibility. I mean, the brain is, at its core, a meaning-making machine. It constantly monitors your internal physiological state, your heart rate, your digestion, your muscle tension.
Okay.
And if your nervous system sends up a flare, perhaps because you are dehydrated, sleep-deprived, or overcaffeinated, you experience a physical sensation of restlessness.
So the brain detects that physical alarm and immediately searches for a cause.
Exactly. It vastly prefers a terrible explanation over an unexplained mystery. So the default mode network scans your life, looks at your career, your relationships, your bank account, and concludes, oh, we must be in physical danger because of that upcoming presentation.
The physical sensation is the anchor, and the thoughts are just the justification.
Yes. The research brief summarizes this brilliantly with the quote, "The body sends an alarm. The mind writes a novel."
The mind writes a novel to explain a tense jaw. That changes everything about how you interact with your own thoughts. I mean, if you realize the anxiety isn't a premonition of doom, but just your brain trying to narrate a spike in cortisol, you really don't have to take the story so seriously.
It gives you so much power back.
It really does. And understanding how the default mode network operates, how it turns inward when external tasks vanish, that perfectly explains why this always seems to peak in the middle of the night.
Oh, absolutely. Nighttime provides the ultimate conditions for the default mode network to completely dominate.
Because you lie down to sleep, the lights are off, the emails have stopped arriving, and the immediate demands of your day just disappear.
Right. The external stimulation drops to basically zero. And because there is no external puzzle to occupy the brain's executive functioning, the DMN just takes the wheel.
And without any external reality to tether it, minor, unresolved worries suddenly inflate to catastrophic proportions.
Which kicks off a deeply destructive cycle. You experience daily stress, which creates physiological tension. That tension triggers the DMN when you get into bed, resulting in rumination.
And that rumination delays your sleep and completely degrades your sleep quality.
Exactly. And the crucial piece here is that poor sleep physically compromises your prefrontal cortex, the exact part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation.
So what does this all mean? We are literally making ourselves too exhausted to emotionally regulate, which in turn keeps us awake.
It's a compounding loop of cognitive and emotional exhaustion. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it also challenges the way we view the relationship between mood and thought.
How so?
Well, there's this assumption that if you are in a bad mood, you will naturally ruminate. But the experimental studies highlighted in the sources specifically from major reviews on rumination induction demonstrate that rumination is not merely a symptom of a bad mood, it is an active participant in maintaining it.
Wow. So when researchers induce rumination in a clinical setting, they actually find that it prolongs and intensifies depressive and anxious states.
Exactly. The more the brain rehearses a negative neural pathway, the more entrenched that pathway becomes. It acts like a blinder. It makes it increasingly difficult for the brain to switch its attention to positive or neutral information.
Completely impairing your real-world problem-solving efficiency because you lose the ability to see actual solutions when your brain is entirely occupied by the threat loop.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have a very clear picture of the trap now. Overthinking is an intolerance of uncertainty, driven by a hijacked default mode network that is often responding to a physical body alarm, which then degrades our sleep and traps us in a loop.
It's quite the trap.
It is. So the fundamental question is, how do we break the loop? If we are stuck in the roundabout, what do the clinical frameworks actually say about rewiring this behavior?
Well, the sources detail several of the most robust evidence-based treatments, starting with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which really remains the gold standard in clinical guidelines.
Right.
A massive transdiagnostic meta-analysis confirmed its high efficacy for reducing both worry and rumination. CBT introduces these highly structural tools to disrupt the habit, such as worry scheduling.
And the mechanics of worry scheduling are fascinating because they don't ask you to just suppress the thought.
Right, suppression doesn't work.
Instead, you establish a strict 15 to 30-minute window, say, maybe at 4:30 p.m. as your designated worry time. So when an anxious thought arises at 10 a.m., you acknowledge it, but you deliberately postpone engaging with it until 4:30 p.m.
And the beauty of that is, by the time that scheduled window actually arrives, the neurological urgency of the thought is almost always dissipated. It completely breaks the immediate stimulus response conditioning.
That's amazing. CBT also utilizes the problem-solving split, right? Forcing you to categorize a worry as either controllable or uncontrollable.
Yes. If it is controllable, you dictate a single next action. If it isn't, you basically must practice tolerating the lack of resolution.
Now, building upon traditional CBT is a specialized offshoot known as rumination-focused CBT, and this approach specifically targets the abstract nature of rumination.
That's right. The primary objective there is to physically shift the brain's processing style from abstract, conceptual thinking into concrete, experiential thinking.
This is the shift from why to how, because when you are caught asking, why am I like this? Why do I always ruin opportunities? You are just swimming in abstract concepts that have no solid edges.
Which the brain hates.
Exactly. Rumination-focused CBT forces you to translate that into concrete data. What specific event just occurred? What are the actual facts of the situation? And what is the single most useful action I can take in the next 10 minutes?
And by forcing the brain to process concrete details, you are biologically engaging the executive functioning networks.
Which naturally suppresses the activity of the default mode network. You are essentially forcing the brain out of the roundabout and onto a paved road.
Exactly. Now, another highly effective framework discussed in the literature is metacognitive therapy, or MCT. And MCT represents a huge paradigm shift because it completely ignores the actual content of your thoughts.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're worrying about your health, your finances, or your social life. MCT only cares about your beliefs, about your thoughts. It targets metacognitive beliefs, thinking about thinking.
Like the belief that worrying helps me prepare for the worst, or my thoughts are completely uncontrollable and will drive me crazy.
Exactly those beliefs.
But hold on, if my brain is telling me I'm going to completely fail a massive project, you're saying I shouldn't try to outline all the reasons I won't fail. That feels incredibly counterintuitive. I mean, if a threat is screaming at me, wouldn't ignoring the content of the thought just make the anxiety escalate?
This raises an important question, and it really feels counterintuitive because our instinct is always to defend ourselves. But MCT identifies that the act of arguing with the thought is precisely what sustains the anxiety.
Because you're engaging with it.
Right. If you try to prove the thought wrong, you are validating the thought's premise that there is a debate to be had. You're still inside the roundabout, feeding energy into the loop.
I see.
The objective in MCT is not to find the perfect counter-argument to soothe the anxiety. The objective is to recognize that the thought itself is completely harmless, and you do not have to obey it or interact with it. You dismantle the belief that the thinking is actually serving you.
So you don't even argue with the thought itself. You just argue with your own belief that the thinking is actually helping you.
Precisely. Trying to answer every overthinking thought is just a trap. The goal isn't finding the perfect answer, it's stopping feeding the loop.
That makes a lot of sense. Arguing with the thought gives it credibility, which seamlessly connects to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or MBCT, because the sources highlight a specific skill within MBCT called decentering.
Decentering is a fantastic tool.
It's the practice of creating psychological distance. You literally transition your internal monologue from, I am a failure and everything is going wrong, to, I am currently experiencing the thought that I am a failure.
And the neurology behind decentering is profound.
Yeah.
When you fuse with a thought, your amygdala, the brain's fear center reacts as if the thought is a literal physical reality.
Right.
But when you practice decentering, treating the thought as just a passing mental object, you activate the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
That activation sends an inhibitory signal down to the amygdala, dampening the physiological fear response.
You change your relationship to the thought from being a participant to being an observer. And for individuals where repetitive thinking is heavily paired with depressive symptoms or severe lethargy, the research points to behavioral activation.
Yes, which is another crucial piece.
The fundamental principle of behavioral activation completely inverses our normal operating logic. It dictates that you must act before you feel ready. Do not wait for motivation. Act first, and clarity and motivation will follow.
Because overthinking thrives on the premise that you must think until you achieve clarity or motivation, and only then can you act. But anxiety and depression biologically deplete dopamine, meaning the motivation will honestly never arrive while you just sit there thinking.
Behavioral activation recognizes that action generates the dopamine, which then creates the motivation and the clarity. When you physically engage your body in a meaningful task, even a small one, you force the brain to focus on external stimuli, quieting the internal threat loop.
It's a brilliantly simple but difficult shift.
It is. So we have discussed some incredible clinical frameworks, CBT, MCT, MBCT, and behavioral activation. But we need to translate these high-level therapies into a fluid, practical protocol, your anti-overthinking toolkit. If you find yourself slipping into a severe rumination spiral later today, how do you actually deploy the science in the moment? Well, the sources offer a clear 6-step method to break the habit. And it starts with step 1. Name it. The moment you feel the tension, you have to label the process. You consciously state, this is overthinking, not problem solving.
Right. By naming it, you interrupt the automatic nature of the habit. From there, you move to step 2. Identify and classify. Ask yourself if you are dealing with a future worry, a past rumination, or simply the panic of uncertainty. Categorizing the thought strips away its emotional intensity and turns it into just a data point.
Once it is categorized, you apply step 3. The control question. You look directly at the fear and ask, can I do something about this today?
Which leads perfectly into step 4, act or postpone. If the answer is yes, you take one small action. If the answer is no, if the outcome is beyond your influence, you must actively delay it to your designated worry time. You refuse to engage with it in the present moment.
And if you find that you are still caught in the loop, you utilize step 5, convert. You shift from abstract to concrete. You banish questions that begin with why and replace them with what. You move from why am I struggling to what do I need right now?
And finally, if the mental loop is simply too strong to break cognitively, you hit step 6, exit through the body, remembering the concept of the body alarm.
Yes. I love step 6. If the mind is writing a novel to explain a physiological state, you have to exit the loop through the body. You change your physical state to change your mental state. You go for a walk, you stretch, you take a shower, or you splash freezing cold water on your face.
That cold water technique is particularly effective. It triggers the mammalian dive reflex, which instantly forces the parasympathetic nervous system to lower your heart rate and redirects blood flow, essentially forcing a physiological reset.
It is exactly like when your computer freezes. You don't try to type more commands into the keyboard to fix it. That just overwhelms the system further.
You're just mashing buttons.
Exactly. You just physically pull the plug, let the hardware reset, and reboot the system. You have to pull the plug on the rumination by moving the body.
I love that analogy. You really have to pull the plug. And as you execute that reset, the research offers a deeply anchoring phrase to keep in mind to cap off the protocol. I do not need to solve my entire life inside this thought.
Wow. I do not need to solve my entire life inside this thought.
It relieves the immense pressure that the default mode network places on our shoulders. You are actually allowed to let a thought remain unanswered.
We have covered incredible ground today. Just to briefly recap the journey, we completely redefined the habit. Overthinking isn't intelligence. It's a transdiagnostic loop of repetitive negative thinking.
A threat loop in a costume.
Yes. We explored how the default mode network gets hijacked, often triggered by a physical body alarm, and how that mental novel degrades our sleep and ruins our emotional regulation. And most importantly, we mapped out how to break the circuit. By delaying the worry, shifting from abstract questions to concrete actions, refusing to argue with the irrational beliefs, and finally, pulling the plug by physically exiting through the body.
It provides a truly comprehensive blueprint for reclaiming your cognitive energy. You are no longer required to be a hostage to the roundabout.
To wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. We established that the engine of overthinking is a profound intolerance of uncertainty. Your nervous system fundamentally believes that not knowing what will happen is a dangerous state, and it uses endless analysis to try and protect you from that danger.
That's the core issue.
So, what if the next time you find yourself completely paralyzed by analysis over a minor, inconsequential decision, you intentionally made a totally random or even slightly wrong small choice? What if you picked the restaurant without reading the reviews or sent the email without proofreading it for the 5th time? Just to prove to your own nervous system that the world doesn't end and that uncertainty is actually safe. What if leaning directly into the uncertainty is the exact proof your brain needs?